What is the best type in Pokemon? I feel like sometimes I structure these intros to like build to some big reveal for the topic of the video, but like, you read the title, you know what we're doing here, let's not mess around. Though if you're new around here, I should let you know, this isn't your typical YouTube listicle based on personal anecdotes and internet consensus. No, I want to crunch all the numbers to find out which type is statistically the best. And so, that's what we're gonna do. Again, it was in the title. You knew that? Let's just get on with it. Richard, hit that intro. Alright, before we get into the video, fun little challenge for you all. Leave your bet as to how many times I'll say the word type in this video. Because, oh boy, it's a lot. I'll respond with like a fun emoji or something if you're right, I don't know. To make sure my rankings today don't include any personal bias, I'm going to be using a statistical model called a decision matrix. And yes, it's just as cool as it sounds. What we need to do is score each type based on a number of different factors. Then we can do a little bit of math wizardry to turn all that data into a single score out of 10 possible points. And by math wizardry, I mean pretty much just like some multiplication. It's not that bad. And in the end, not only will we know which type is statistically the best, we will also have a definitive ranking for each and every type. And we'll also learn a bunch of fun little tidbits along the way, like, have you ever wondered which type is the least accurate on average? I bet you are now, so let's get into it. Now, in Pokemon, your type generally impacts two things: how hard you can hit, and how hard you get hit. So let's start off with the simpler of the two, defensiveness. Pokemon is basically just a big game of rock, paper, scissors. But like one of those overly complicated versions that third graders play with like lizards and guns, and for some reason we all thought that Cloud was the unbeatable pick. Like, guess what? Boom, condensation. Now your Cloud has turned to rain and you're done, Timmy! Now, I could just go through the type chart and count how many other types each type resists and is weak to, if that makes sense. But that doesn't necessarily paint the full picture. For instance, water and fairy both have two weaknesses, but electric and grass are far more common than steel and poison, so it wouldn't make sense to score them the same. So here's what I did. I got a list of all the attacks in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the most recent games, and counted the total number of damaging attacks of each type. The idea is that if there are more attacks of a certain type, you have a better chance of being hit by said type. Then, using the type chart, I was able to figure out how many attacks each individual type was weak to, resisted, and was immune to. For example, the normal type is weak to 29 of the 424 damaging attacks in the game, immune to 17, and resistant to 0, because normal doesn't resist anything. This will give us 3 different scores for each type, but the decision matrix process requires just 1. Luckily, this is an easy problem to solve. We just need to go another layer deeper and create another decision matrix within this decision matrix. Turning these 3 scores into a single representative value requires 3 simple steps. First, you have to normalize your data. If you look closely, you'll notice that most types have a lot of weaknesses and resistances, but not a lot of immunities. So if we simply added them together, say, to get a final score, those immunities would get lost in the shuffle, which isn't that fair. So what we're going to do is take each of these scores and divide it by whatever the highest score was for that category. So for example, Rock has the most weaknesses at 127 total moves. So we're going to divide every single weakness score by 127. Then we'll do the same for resistances and immunities. This will put everything on a consistent scale from 0 to 1, with 1 being the highest in any given category. But we're not done quite yet. For resistances and immunities, having a higher score is preferable because it means you can tank more moves. But for weaknesses, you actually want a lower number. So, as one final step, we need to take each normalized weakness score and subtract it from 1. This basically just flips our scale so that a higher number becomes low and a low number becomes high, just as we want. Normalizing our data like this makes everything a lot easier to compare, which is helpful for our next step, weights. When making a decision matrix, you don't always want to assume that every factor is equally important. You might want one to weigh more heavily in your calculations. For example, I would argue that having a lot of immunities is the most important in terms of defenses. A bunch of resisted attacks will eventually still take anything down. But if an attack deals 0 damage, baby, you can sit there all day long. Until, they pick a different attack that you're not immune to. So actually, you probably just get the one turn, but it's still good. And I'd also argue that having more resistances is slightly more important than not having weaknesses. After all, it's pretty easy to avoid types you're weak to by simply switching out. But if you do, you're probably going to want to switch into a Pokemon that resists that attack. Therefore, a resistance offers extra utility. Accounting for this in the math is super simple. Just pick a number for each factor representing how important you think it is relative to the others, with a higher number equating to more importance. So in this example, I think the weakness score is the least important of the three, though still valuable on its own. So we'll give it a score of 2. Resistance is a bit more important, so we'll give that a 3, and immunity is the most important, so we'll give it a 4. Now just take each of these weights and divide it by the sum of all the weights, giving you a percentage of the pie that each factor should take up. And now, getting the final score is pretty simple. Simply take the sum of each factor's normalized score multiplied by its weight percentage. In statistics, this is called the weighted average, and the result will be a single number between 0 and 1 for each type, perfectly calibrated to all the others. And that is the decision matrix process. You normalize, then you pick your weights, and then you take the average. Just remember NWA. I don't have like a fun mnemonic device really, unless you're a fan of old wrestling promotions. I don't know, you're probably just gonna have to memorize this one. Anyway, doing this, we can find that Ice is the worst typing defensively. Not super surprising, it's got a lot of pretty common weaknesses, and only one resistance, which is itself. And also unsurprisingly, Ghost is the best defensive typing, thanks largely to its 2 immunities, but also helped by the fact that it's only weak to 2 comparatively rare types in Ghost and Dark. Alright, I know I spent a pretty long time on just the first category, but now that we know how the decision matrix process works, the next couple should be a lot quicker. The next factor is obviously offense. Now, just like last time, I don't want to find the number of types each type is strong against. I want to find the number of Pokemon each type is strong against. And that's a bit more difficult this time around, because it means we also have to account for type combinations. Luckily, the Pokemon database contains a dual type chart that shows the interactions for every type combination in the game, as well as the number of Pokemon each combination has. Now, we do run into a bit of a problem here in that this table includes every single Pokemon to date, but we are only interested in the Pokemon available in Scarlet and Violet. However, assuming that the proportion of Pokemon in each type combination is roughly the same for both the National Dex and the Scarlet and Violet Dex, it actually doesn't matter. That's one of the benefits of the decision matrix process. Because we're pulling data from a whole bunch of different sources, each part only makes up a small piece of the final answer. So little inaccuracies and shortcuts here and there won't actually change the final result. As long as we're in enough of the right ballparks, it should all come out in the wash. It's literally a process that enables my laziness. I mean, what more could you ask for? Anyway, using a similar process to before, I can count the total number of Pokemon that each type can hit super effective, neutrally, and resisted. And since this is a dual type chart, we also have to throw in the 4 times and 1/4 times multipliers, as well as the immunities. And before you think I'm crazy sitting there slowly counting out each and every Pokemon individually, don't worry, I made a spreadsheet that did it all in like 2 seconds. Work smarter, not harder. Now we can just run through the same NWA process using these weights to get the final offense score. This reveals that, statistically speaking, Rock is actually the best offensive typing, followed very closely by Flying and Ice, while Normal comes in at the bottom. True, it can hit a lot of things for neutral damage, but like, so can a lot of other types. The next factor I wanted to consider was moves, because it doesn't matter how amazing a type is offensively, if all its attacks suck. This one was pretty simple. I just got a list of every attack in Scarlet and Violet and sorted them into damaging and status moves. I then went ahead and calculated the average strength of each type's moves by multiplying the average base power of all moves of that type by the average accuracy. This process reveals some interesting things, like how dragon moves are on average the strongest, but also some less useful information like how ice is pound for pound the least accurate type in the game. See, a couple of minutes ago, you didn't even know that was a question you should be asking, and now you got a great bit of trivia. Of course, that's only half the story. Yeah, when I was a kid, I thought that status moves were code for literally useless, but I was also an idiot. Now, quantifying status moves is a little bit trickier because there's no strict metric to determine how useful they are. So I decided to kinda cheat a little bit and simply use the raw number of status moves for each type as the score for this factor, assuming that if a type's got a lot of status moves, I don't know, some of them are probably pretty good. Is this a good metric? Far from it. But without introducing my own personal bias on how good each status move is, it's the best we're gonna do. Remember, the decision matrix process is resilient enough to tolerate some of my shenanigans, which is good, because you know I love to pull some statistics shenanigans. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? I don't know what I'm saying anymore. So that just leaves one more factor to talk about that I'm affectionately labeling the other stuff. A lot of types in the game have little added innate benefits that aren't accounted for anywhere else. Things like water attacks dealing more damage in the rain, grass types being immune to powder moves, and poison types clearing out toxic spikes. Again, this one's a little bit hard to quantify, but I think I've come up with a pretty simple process that accounts for both the quantity and quality of these benefits. Any innate ability that you can reliably benefit from grants 3 points. You could always choose to set up the sun and boost the power of your fire type attacks. If a perk is helpful, but requires something from your opponent in order to benefit from it, that's worth 2 points. Dark types being immune to priority moves from Prankster can be really helpful, assuming that your opponent has a Pokemon with Prankster. And finally, any ability that is pretty niche with limited use cases gets you 1 point. Ice types being immune to the freeze condition is technically a benefit, but since freeze is so rare compared to other conditions like burn and paralysis, it didn't feel right to put it on the same level. And so, that's the 6 unique factors that we're judging each type on. Let's compile all that data into one final matrix and go through the NWA process one last time. First, we'll standardize everything just like we've always done. Then we have to select our final weights. I decided to weigh average move power the lowest, with just a weight of 1. Because when you think about it, having a lot of strong or weak moves isn't always that important. I don't care how many trash ground type moves are out there, I got my Earthquake, I'm chillin'. I weighed status and other factors next at 2, mainly because other factors are usually situational, and our method for quantifying status moves was not the best, so I don't want it to skew my data too much. And ultimately, I decided to weigh offense and defense the same at 4. True, depending on the Pokemon in question, one might be more important than the other, but we're not talking about individual Pokemon, we're talking about types as a whole. Now, depending on your playstyle, some of you may have a problem with these weights. After all, in a casual playthrough, about 90% of these added benefits are completely irrelevant. If you're playing through X and Y with a full rain team, you're doing too much. But in a competitive setting, getting a special defense boost in a sandstorm might be huge. And for that reason, I have great news. In the description below, I've linked the full spreadsheet that I created for this video, which you can download completely for free. I've highlighted all the weights sections in yellow, so if you save your own copy of the sheet and edit them to better reflect your Pokemon playstyle, the final scores and rankings will automatically update accordingly. Like I said, it is completely free, you can just go down there and use it, but I am going to adopt the Wikipedia model and kindly ask that if you do, maybe just drop a subscribe on the channel. We're super close to 50k subs, which is absolutely wild, and I just think it'd be pretty cool to hit it in the next few months, so I'll just leave it at that. Do whatever you want to do, but But using the more general weights that I've selected, it's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. We've created matrices within matrices within matrices. I mean, we're like Keanu Reeves up in here. And through it all, we've uncovered the definitive ranking for every type in the game. So, let's take a look at the results. Unsurprisingly, Normal came out at the absolute bottom. It's not great offensively, not great defensively. Yeah, it's got some okay attacks, and like 90% of status moves are normal, but aside from that, it's just not bringing a whole lot to the table. Of course, that doesn't mean that all normal types are automatically bad, far from it. But look, there's a reason Arceus is out here trying to get all these plates, is all I'm saying. Moving up the list to 4th place, we have Rock, which was a bit of a surprise to me. I never thought that Rock was all that good, but honestly, I think I just miscast it in my head. You think that the Rock type should be very defensive, and a lot of Rock Pokemon seem to be designed that way, but it turns out that it really shines more as a hard hitter. Which, kind of makes sense. Getting hit by a rock would hurt pretty bad. In 3rd, we have Flying, which is also very strong offensively, and honestly, it's not great from a defensive standpoint, but with 3 resistances and an immunity to ground, it's not bad either. And of course, for all you VGC lovers out there, immunity to most entry hazards can be a great cherry on top. Unless the hazard is Stealth Rock, then it's more like a cherry tomato on top. Now, some of you may be curious why I decided to reveal the top 4 rather than the usual top 3? Well, that's because the number 1 and the number 2 types were so close, they were literally off by 100th of a point. And look, I'll let you know, the top 2 were Fire, thanks to its strong offenses, Sun synergy, and immunity to burn, and Steel, the absolute king of defense, and a lot better offensively than a lot of people give it credit for. They were so closely matched for very different reasons that you could probably call it a draw. But, technically speaking, according to the math, the statistically best type in the game is Fire, which was just barely bumped over the top thanks to the fact that you can use a fire move to thaw yourself out of being frozen. Is choosing the fire starter basic? Sure, but it's also objectively correct. And there you have it, a full statistical ranking for each and every type in Pokemon. Till next time. Dang, first the simple to-the-point intro, and now a clean outro. Dude, am I the best type in Pokemon? Because I am on fire. I should work that in somehow. What do you mean you're still rolling? And of course, a massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, including Alex, Alakazam, Big Dog Ty for the win, Captain Kirby, Sidian, Sharian Mark, Stylish, The Boss Killer 94, Ty Studio, and Moki Ubu.